All right. Hi. Hello, everybody. We are going to get started. Good evening. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. My name is Dave Q, and I'm the Director of Programs at Asian Arts Initiative. We are located in Philadelphia in the Chinatown North neighborhood, where from our multidisciplinary art space, we offer exhibitions, performances, artist residencies, youth workshops, and a community gathering space. This season, Asian Arts Initiative is so proud to present programs in the theme of care. Over the last year and a half of the pandemic, we've all had to confront some sort of absence of care to varying degrees, and no matter how you define what care is. And yet, we as communities of color have always had to take care of one another in the face of systemic failures. Our exhibition celebrates the mutual aid initiatives led by Black, Indigenous, and people of color in the city of Philadelphia. Our season celebrates these joyful innovations of the communities of care. One thing I do want to say, even though we are meeting virtually today, we want to acknowledge that the building that we call home sits on the traditional territory of the Lenni Lenape. We thank the original stewards of this land. We recognize their continuing relationship with this territory, and we honor the ancestors that we bring into this room with us. If you stop by our gallery, which is open Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Saturdays between 2 and 6, you'll see care in action. Our community fridge, which is modeled after the fridge on 52nd Street, hosted by Mina's World Cafe in West Philadelphia. Our fridge also offers free pantry and grocery items, inviting you to take what you need and leave what you don't. Our free and lending library, compiled with the folks at Making Worlds Bookstore, also in West Philadelphia, offers curated readings about the Asian American experience. And we also have a kiosk set up by Television, an artist collective, where they seek to extend their low-cost AV and tech rentals to allow more people to gather. And they offer these to independent curators, activists, and organizers in Philadelphia. You'll also find in the exhibition the work of our guest tonight, Marisa Jahn. Of Ecuadorian and Chinese descent, Marisa is an artist whose work redistributes power, exemplifying the possibility of art as social practice. A Creative Capital awardee, John's work has reached audiences at Obama's White House, the United Nations, the New Museum, and others. John is the founder of Studio Rev, which co-designs public art and creative media with low-wage workers, with immigrants, with youth, and with women. She has taught at MIT, her alma mater, Columbia University, and is currently an assistant professor at the New School. I have admired Marisa's work from the day we met. I think Marisa applies a really high-level, sophisticated set of tools and skill in craft, in media, and in storytelling, and uses it not just to bring awareness, but real power and real agency to her subjects and her collaborators. I am so excited to invite Marisa into the room with us to share more about her work and her process.
Thank you so much, Dave, and so happy to be here. Such a fan of the work that you all are doing with humor and so creative and politicized. I really appreciate it.
Yeah. So I'll hop back on the presentation after to deliver audience questions. But yeah, without further ado, the screen is yours, Marisa.
Okay, so just setting my timer. I wanted to start off with this slide, which is by the political economist Gibson Graham, and it is their, they call it Iceberg. And here, oftentimes when we're talking about, or when we're talking about the economy, it can refer to capitalism, but really supporting and undergirding, quote, capitalism and this kind of capitalist commodity exchanges, this whole other world of exchanges, or what my friend Koray Kaliskan would say, economization. So the economy not as this other distant thing, but something that we do, that and through our exchanges with each other, we affirm different kinds of being. So, right, and this vast array of different kinds of economization already takes place, from bartering to care swaps to under the table and informal labor and so forth. And in Gibson Graham's, in this matrix here, which is meant to be read as columns, they focus on childcare and the array of different and patchwork of different childcare that takes place. And so in this body of work that I'm going to share with you today, I'm really interested in making visible what I have been or what I have called pluriconomies. So this world of pluralist economic and political practices, and is a term, pluriconomies, that I'm developing discursively through my collaboration with the architect Rafi Segal. And what does it mean to make them visible? And my work traverses media, including photography to installation, to at times an architectural and urbanistic scale, to film and transmedia work across platforms, to civic media. This is a project that I did at the outbreak of the pandemic that was shared by different civic groups and worker and immigration oriented community groups in particular. And really what we're looking at is, there's different resources that were created in the pandemic to support different kinds of workers, but really for those who are undocumented and working under the table, there's this gray zone, and it was really unclear. And so I worked with a team of lawyers, including Carmela Huang, who happens to be my cousin and just an amazing kick-ass lawyer, to create and make more visible or explicit what rights undocumented folks did have access to. So, in the way that this conversation about pluriconomies and the solidarity economy figures into my work is explored in part through this project that's on view right now at the Venice Biennale of Architecture. And it's a collaboration with Rafi Segal, Sarah Williams, and Greg Lindsay. And in this project, the installation invites you into this community or this space, and it pulls you in, and then you see this video, and then you're invited to peek around and examine some of the issues and different projects that we've been developing, as well as an online platform. But I'm going to share with you a sneak peek of that video.
Design is a world constructing agency. We design the world, and the world designs us back. Now, if what we have designed is so problematic, the question becomes, can design be reoriented? And I know we have to design things, and we have to create dwellings, but the challenge is, how do we recreate those dwellings in a way that don't make us more isolated than we already are, but enable reconnections.
So historically, Black women have played a critical role in building the economic solidarity of their communities. We're really not just reacting against things, we're building spaces, activities, and connections for the long run, helping to build a community that extends beyond ourselves, and that is solidarity.
In order to create the common, it's something that's neither public nor private property, but is shared and collectively decided. That requires a design structure.
Buildings solidarity for workers means building spaces for our communities to flourish and express our values.
Now, I want to go back to this image here. And what I really love about this architectural installation that Rafi designed is that, the bench becomes a roof, becomes a space, becomes a screen. And this kind of shift asks you to reconsider what is normalized, i.e. the rectilinearity of the spaces that we normally inhabit. And it asks you to reconsider. And there was this felicitous error that happened when we were designing this, which is that, we had already submitted the fabrication drawings to the crew that was building it. And we realized that the screen is not 16:9 or 3:4 ratio aspect. And so we needed to rethink the film fundamentally. And I started thinking about the way in which the architecture is already asking us to rethink the conventions of design. And so I then reconsidered, we're so used to the 16:9, 3:4 convention, but what happens, this is an aperture or window, a convention that we're given, but how can we rethink that? So that's why throughout the video, you see this masked, it's never rectilinear, and it's always skewed and cut off, and intentionally there's things that are excluded or included. So for me, this functions as a way of rethinking how, just rethinking society altogether, what that means and what does that mean for care. So now, the context to this body of work, which I call the CareForce, the context starts or a historical inflection point happens in the 1930s when domestic workers, which is nannies, housekeepers, and caregivers, and farm workers were intentionally excluded from receiving the same rights as other workers. And for years, this systematic exclusion took place until the 2000s, when Ai-jen-poo and women domestic leaders, worker leaders in New York started organizing, and then in 2010 passed the nation's first domestic worker Bill of Rights, which grants them the same rights as other workers. So day of rest, meal breaks, and so forth. And to get the word out to the state's 200,000 domestic workers, an advocacy organization approached me to create different tools and to inform their workers. And so the first thing we created was an audio novella app, which we then also did for the state of California and Massachusetts when they passed their Bill of Rights. And this is what our workshops look like. So they involve a lot of play and a lot of character playing here. The prompt was that to consider different challenges or opportunities that domestic workers face, but you couldn't be a human, you had to be an animal. So, or you could be, one woman was a clock, one woman was impersonating an octopus with many hands kind of situation. And this is what the audio novellas that we created sound like.
I'm a ham Sammy, I'm a happy ham Sammy, no break for Nanny, she's never gonna eat me. Woohoo, woohoo.
Not for long. Timesheets and record keeping. Mijas, hear that cuckoo clock? She's reminding you, keep good records of your hours worked and wages paid. Your personal. This is Clara, reporting live from the inside of a vacuum cleaner. This place is packed with bedbugs, and the scene here is absolutely wild. These six-legged critters are notorious for infesting homes nationwide and drinking the blood of ordinary citizens.
Hey, lady.
lady.
Ay, Dios mío, my lungs are talking to me again.
So
¿Qué
those
quieres?
were recorded with both domestic workers as well as the woman who was helping me care for my son when he was a baby. Anya Krawczyk is herself a really talented voice actress and actress. And so we would put my baby to sleep, and then we would record this in the closet, in our kind of makeshift recording studio. And the way that you access these audio novellas is that, so this was created before smartphones were affordable or accessible to domestic workers. And so we made it, we worked with a team of engineers at MIT, and we created this system where you call in using any kind of phone at any hour, and you call 347 work 500, and you can access them, these audio novellas. And so, we continue to work on this as well as other policy toolkits, interactive digital media experiences, and so forth, and to meet domestic workers where they're at, to both get the word out, but also to continue hearing people's stories. We created this thing called the Nanny van, which we refer to as a mobile studio. So Anya, my baby, and our media crew, were, including Anja Masharia, essentially we traveled over 12,000 miles, going to different states. And the way that the Nanny van works is that it pops up in different public spaces, for example, transit stops, to toddler hour at the public library, to or after when school lets out, and so forth. And we convene people. This is a snippet of what she looked like. She was born for 7 junkyards, and when she went kaput, then after a good period of mourning, then we created, this is a policy toolkit. Let me just get ahead to this. We then created the CareForce one, which looks like this essentially. I'm gonna go back to these guys. We created, this is some of the work that we created along the way. In the way that we see different employment posters for salaried workers, we created them for domestic workers. We also drew on the iconography of these WPA era posters to create propaganda for the care crisis and care opportunity. And these are silkscreen prints. We created 4 songs that mix the songs sung by domestic workers that we encountered, who use their creativity as organizing tools, with bootylicious dance songs. And we created this album and so forth, which looks like this, which you accessed really through augmented reality. Along the way, we also worked with caregivers and choreographers to create these dances that narrate the history of the domestic worker movement. And, it was a way, this is the kind of thing that we performed on the streets or at rallies or after, a hearing at a state house. And it was just like a celebratory way to bring people together. That was this kind of ongoing improvised project. So one of the things that people often ask me is how we measure the success of the project. And I mean, we reached, over 25,000 people on the ground, either handing out flyers, through we can count the number of people who called into the audio novella app, to convenings, mass convenings with domestic workers, and then millions more. The project was featured on BBC, to the New York Times, to Univision Global, and different live TV broadcasts. But I think so those are certainly, of course, measures of success that we're very proud of, and we were very clear that one of our goals in reaching out through the media was to meme domestic worker to the quote general public. But this photo here is a reminder for us about why it is that we do the work that we do. And this was a piñata that was created by a group of domestic workers in California. And they created it a year after we had come to California to do work with them. And they felt so connected to the project and that they made this piñata to celebrate the 1-year anniversary of, well, first of all, I believe it was the 1-year anniversary of us coming there, which coincided with the passage of the California Domestic Worker Bill of Rights. I mean, it wasn't that they asked us permission, they just felt a sense of ownership. And for me as an artist, what I feel like is a reminder to me is, I feel like in my work, I create porous structures and I invite other people to adapt, to participate and play along and adapt it. And so this for me is a signal that I'm doing something right. This is, and I wanted to share this with you because this is a audience engagement plan that we created to be able to articulate to ourselves and our partners about the kinds of things that we're producing and for whom. So on the bottom row, you see domestic workers, immigrant groups, domestic employers, which are the people who employ nannies, housekeepers, and caregivers, and progressives and allies. So, and the different platforms that we use to reach those groups. When we created the CareForce 1 car, one thing to note is that, Caring Across Generations, which is an advocacy group, reached out to us and they said, well, we know that you're looking for a new car idea and we have this name for what we think could be a cool car, the CareForce 1. And we thought you could do something creative with it, which I felt like was such an honor. And a really awesome name. And so we then, found this awesome 9-seater station wagon on Craigslist and souped it up. And we used the opportunity to also then, in this journey and what then became a film that was distributed by PBS, to reach and speak to domestic employers specifically. And we went through conversations with some of our partners, including iGen and the National Domestic Workers Alliance and Caring Across Generations, they felt that workers in the South are those with the least protections. And so they were curious to find what we would discover. So the journey it's a 4-episode where we're going from New York to Miami to meet with different people about solutions to the care crisis and what people are doing in the face of this problem that affects 40 million Americans. These are 2 women who I've worked with. They're from Adhikar from Human Rights in Queens, New York. And I have filmed Narabada a lot. She's a really talented singer and a really incredible organizer and very joyous and just a lot of fun. And one time when I was sitting down to interview her, I had come to record her singing this revolutionary Nepali song. And then she started breaking into tears because it reminded her of home. And then she was feeling emotional because she was thinking about what she refers to as her sisters or her peers who come to New York. And, when they arrive, there's a precarity and housing challenge. And what she was telling me was that one of her dreams was to have a home where she and her sisters could also be taken care of in age. And it was touching upon some of what iGen and what she had written about in a book, and also what I had picked up on, which is an idea of co-housing where caregivers and their families and care receivers are living together. And I was interested in both, on the one hand, what would this look like? What are new ways of sharing and resource sharing or forming solidarity? And then beyond an instrumental or solutions-oriented approach on the level of symbolism, if we think about the monuments in our urban landscape and our cities, most of them are honoring conquest. And I wondered what it would look like to build monuments that celebrate care, and what, in the way that we have, on the one hand, like my horror is, and what I think is an abomination and a nightmare are, senior centers that look like strip malls and are very institutional feeling. And, if we think about the awesome, sexy architecture that we have built for museums, for example, can we have that for our elders and caregivers? So the project I'm going to share with you now is called CareHaus, which is the US's first care-based co-housing project. And our goals are to provide quality care and homes for older and disabled adults, quality jobs and homes for caregivers and their families, sustainable neighborhood development, and integrated art and contemporary design. So insisting that we all have a right to art and storytelling at all stages of life. The context that may likely not be new to you, but just to remind us, in the conditions that we're particularly responding to is the economic precarity faced by caregivers, in which 60% struggle to feed their own families and regularly skip meals to make ends meet. When we're talking about the care crisis, by the year 2030, the population over 80 will increase by 79%. But the prime caregiving age group, those between 45 and 64, will only increase by 1%. So this points us to the need for new ways of thinking of congregate care or clustered care, which we haven't really designed for. So for both caregivers and receivers, the toll of isolation is among their chief challenges. So as older adults lose mobility, they become increasingly isolated, which takes a toll on their health. And for caregivers, isolation is a lot of stress, and it also contributes to abuse and injury and ergonomic injury. If you can imagine that a caregiver is lifting a heavy client from a bathtub and injuring their back, for example, with someone who has dementia or memory issues, the ability to tag team, it's so stressful that the ability to tag team with other workers and, do 2 hours, take a break, sort of switch tasks is really important. So we asked this question about how we can improve upon the social determinants of health to improve our quality of life. And these are my two key partners. So this is Rafi Siegel, who's an architect, and Ernst Valerie, who is a real estate developer and planner based in Baltimore. Rafi's work includes many civic buildings, different museums, to this library, and also working on an urban scale. Ernst's work as a developer includes this various multi-family housing buildings, as well as this brewery, the Ministry of Brewery in Baltimore, which has a youth mentorship program. And so the way that CareHaus works is that older adults needing care pay into CareHaus, and those older adults may have their care needs and housing needs subsidized in part by Medicare and Medicaid. And this provides salary and equity for the caregivers and their families, as well as quality housing. In Baltimore, we're looking at a ratio of 17 older and disabled adults to 4 caregivers whom also have their kids there. And that the reason we often get a lot of questions about the caregivers and care receivers living together and whether it causes burnouts. And we've really involved caregivers in all stages of creating this project. And the reason why we have 4 on the caregiving side is so that there can always be a shift of 2 and 2, and people also can take vacations, but they can tag teams. So it's not one person burning out. So this is our site in Baltimore, which is an abandoned building that was struck by lightning. It's in an area called Johnston Square, where the residents have, they have already self-identified that they are interested in older adults because they tend to be neighborhood stabilizers. They're also really interested in reviving this neighborhood and corridors cultural heritage and arts heritage specifically, which is interesting. So, and they're really interested in Baltimore, there's a lot of corner stores that function as anchors. And so we're on a key thoroughfare in Baltimore. And the way that we're planning the facade, this is an early stage rendering, really invites people to occupy and inhabit this and sit and hang out in this neighborhood to provide that stability and anchoring. If you compare CareHaus to other senior living facilities, there's more space dedicated to shared space, in which is here shown in pink. This is a floor plan in which you see there's the garden, for example. This is the first floor. There's the entrance and so forth. There's more ADA units that are required. So we're ADA for many disability advocates is the bare minimum of accessibility. And so we're planning for universal design, which goes a step beyond, but also then further, really also considering what it means to design for low vision. And it's something I'm particularly interested in because glaucoma and age-related macular degeneration runs in my family, and I actually have really bad eyesight. So if I take out my contacts, I'm really lost, and it feels really scary and vulnerable, actually. And so, like, you know, my phone is red, my wallet is red, my bag is red, because it's like I can see it without my glasses. So in a sense, I'm designing a space for where I would want to age. And we're designing against this idea of these very institutional spaces. And we're really using art and design to provide ways of wayfinding, for example, in what's referred to as memory boxing. Here you see a mock-up of 5 floors of wallpaper. Yes, that is Bruce Lee up there, who's one of my superheroes, but really is a figure who, you know, from the 70s onward has appealed to so many different groups and is the symbol who embodies solidarity. I'm going to share with you this example. This is the Blopper Art Museum in Houston, in which we transpose the floor plan of the shared space in CareHaus, Baltimore, and use the opportunity to look at what the wallpaper or in sensory mural would look like. So on the floor, on the bottom, you have, well, here on the left, you see Clarice Castor, who's a Haitian American immigrant. And when she came to, the United States, she worked 3 jobs. She cleaned rooms at the Howard Johnson. She took care of neighbors' kids. She saved money in her mattress to be able to loan out to people, because if you were Black and an immigrant, you couldn't go to the bank and get a loan like other folks could. And her kitchen was always open. She made sandwiches for the other Haitian American, the sanitation workers who were driving trucks. And she really embodied what Jessica Nembhard in that video that you saw in the Venice Biennale installation refers to as anchors. You know, Black women are really functioning as anchors in the solidarity economy. And so in the bottom, you see this image of this lioness, which is a symbol of family pride, and in this case, extended family pride. The tulip is a motif that you likely have seen in wallpaper or curtains, for example, and it's a symbol that it's a motif that comes from Central Asia, specifically Uzbekistan, and it's a symbol of love. It then traveled to Amsterdam in Europe, and then the New World. So it's a very diasporic tulip in the way that domestic work is diasporic. And in the top, you see here, you see on the left, you see a little peek of June Barrett, who is an amazing organizer in Miami and Houston, organizing Black domestic workers. On the right here, you see Guillermina Castellanos, who is a really talented singer and organizer, both amazing superheroes who've directly shaped CareHaus's design and, you know, this 10 plus year body of work. And here on the left, you see Billie Holiday, who was a domestic worker, also from a singer. We know her as a singer, she's from Baltimore. And then here you see there's a cluster of, Narvada is also there, Anya is there, Aquilines Versosa, who organizes Filipina domestic workers, is there, and Diana Ucera, who is just an awesome person altogether, and a musician that we've collaborated with a lot, is there too. So these are all women who are using their voice, calling to each other, and galvanizing the movement. So the second floor is dedicated to this theme of voice. So, you know, we're really interested in historicizing this movement and where we're going. And so, yeah, you know, part of when we're thinking about the urban and built environment, it's not only the actual physical spaces, but it's the images that we see and how we're representing our built environment. This is what we've done a number of different co-design sessions, which we continue to do. This is one that we did in Baltimore. On the left, you see some folks who, Rev Silver and Inez, who are neighbors who live across the street from CareHaus. And this is on the left, a physician and someone who focuses on telehealth, who have been involved. And so, you know, with CareHaus, we're also interested in more broadly what it means to support the strategy of care-based co-housing on a policy level. So this summer, with a team that I was working with at MIT, we spent our summer writing a policy paper to inform the Biden and Harris administration at the invitation of MIT, Washington, and Congress people about ways in which there are existing opportunities in existing housing policy or ways to collaborate on the labor side to support senior housing with caregivers supported and part of that model as well. So that concludes my presentation. Thank you so much, David and Anne, and happy to talk with y'all.
I'm sending my love and appreciation for just like, yeah, the body of work that you've been working on, and then just like, even I just want to point out one thing, just even such a small thing as like making sure your phone, your wallet, both of those are red because you know you have terrible eyesight. That is just, that's a level of thinking that I cannot achieve, right? Because I also have terrible eyesight, and I've resigned to the idea that if I ever lose my glasses, that's just it for me. You know, I'm just gonna curl up.
You know,
that's it.
I mean, I have such bad eyesight that one time, I mean, my nightmare is that there's going to be a fire in my house and I'll be stuck. I can't get to the door. I mean, I know how to wayfind to my door, you know, but what if I'm in a place that I don't really know very well? And my nightmare partly came true. One time, an apartment I was living in San Francisco was on fire and we had to leave, and I couldn't find my glasses, and I walked out on the street in my bare feet, and I like had to be led out and kind of walk into walls kind of situation. Wow. So it's really out of paranoia.
I don't share the same paranoia, and therefore I am less equipped to survive than you. So, but I appreciate the level of thinking, the approach that you bring, just to, I guess, all aspects of your life that definitely show up in the work as well. We have a few questions coming in. Julia asks about CareHaus. Is there intergenerational programming offered as part of the experience of living at CareHaus?
Yeah.
Is there a staff person, or who programs? If so, who programs that?
Yeah. So, I mean, in terms of the programming for CareHaus, that's maybe more of a logistical question. That is both as we see it, I mean, we really have been structuring it so that the caretakers are the kind of the caregivers are the anchors of the home.
Mhm.
And they are really, we want for them to be empowered as leaders. We have a number of different amazing community partners in Baltimore, from the Baltimore Art Museum to OpenWorks, which is the largest makerspace in the country, which is a block away. So support there, if there's elders or older adults who want to be involved in initiating that, then they'll be supported as well. I mean, I think for me that intergenerational programming space and overlap is really fascinating. So you can imagine, for example, older adults being able to help the youngers with their homework or gardening, for example, or learning different languages and so forth. I mean, I think, one thing that people talk about in co-housing is the importance of shared meals, in which it's like a practice of coming together, and from which many things unfold. So yeah, I think it's, I'm really excited about that part.
Yeah, and I think the programming is something that kind of gives you an excuse to share the same space, but it's also, I think, what's cool about the approach is that like the design of the house itself. I think we underappreciate how much architecture designs our daily experiences, and therefore how important those design spaces are. So in the CareHaus, yes, you will want some intergenerational programming, but there's also an inherent pushing together of multiple generations in one space that creates for some of those same connections to occur. That's
yeah,
really
and at the same time, so the number one concern, so like in the 1850s and through the 1930s, there was a lot of really interesting co-housing experiments that took place, many of which were led by women, and which is really well chronicled by this historian, Dolores Hayden. And one of the things that comes up over and over again is the middle class fearing a loss of privacy. And that's really like one of the questions that we get a lot. Is like, oh my gosh, does everyone like live in a jumble? And like, so everybody has their own private space and their own mini kitchen. There's a larger shared kitchen, but that was something that was important to us, that was expressed by everybody from the get-go.
And it's interesting that you point that out as like one of the initial responses you get. I can't help but point out that like the team of you, Rafi and Ernst, are kind of maybe not presenting as immediately American, and it feels like the CareHaus is a potential solution to such a uniquely American problem of like, what do we do with our elders? They are no longer productive, but like we can't just toss them aside. Is there anything to that? Is that an incorrect kind of assessment?
No, I mean, well, so the reason why the co-housing initiatives, which many were quite successful, the reason why it ended in the 1930s was because there was this Red Scare, and there was the people who were promulgating this Red Scare were developers who benefited from building the nuclear family, single family home in suburbs, and car companies. So together with politicians whom they lobbied, they issued new design guidelines for designing for nuclear family suburban homes. And it was heavily advertised and incentivized. So, and then further as a consequence, when women were no longer in an dense urban area, they were no longer, and like essentially separated, they could no longer organize. So I feel like I'm working in this tradition of these material feminists, who are really seeking to transform the experience of their daily life, or I feel honored to, I don't know. But
along those lines of the politics, Dan asks if you can elaborate on the policy documents sent to the Biden administration, and if there's a website with more info on the policy and legislation side in particular.
I love me a good policy wonk. And I have to say, in my work altogether, I spend so much time looking through policy and law altogether. Because I think it's like really fascinating. And, it seems like this, like the economy, it seems like it's out there and it's like this thing, but really it's like, of course, made by humans. And there's so many gray area opportunities. It has not been published. We are, I don't know if it's public. We're doing a lightning talk to Congress people coming up, and you want to share it with them first. I think it's like a sensitive issue that we're not able to make public at this time, but we will certainly seek to publish it. Okay. I should also say, I don't know. Rafi and I are both working on a book about design and solidarity, conversations across art, architecture, and plural economies. There's a section on CareHaus, and I wonder if the policy is going to make it trickle into there. That comes out in spring 2020, next spring.
Next spring, okay.
I'll let you know about that policy document.
We'll be waiting eagerly.
Bedside reading.
I apologize about this name pronunciation, but Ashvarya asks, well, first she says, thank you so much for this amazing talk. So much to think about. Ashvarya is wondering if there are extensions for this model for folks of other ages living with disabilities and their caregivers.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I mean, we're in conversation with stakeholders and community groups in other cities in the United States. There's one group that I can't really make public, but they really focus on adults with disabilities who are in their middle years. So, how do we refer to people? I'm 44, but how do we refer to people in our middle years without calling us middle-aged? I mean,
I was reading something you wrote, and you referred to us as the sandwich generation. I also heard that in another talk with a caregiver about how we are sandwiched between elder caregiving and infant caregiving. I mean, some sociologists break up this demographic, the spectrum in terms of 4 quartiles, right? So there's the young, old, young, young, old, and old. So I'd like to think that we're here. Okay.
The old young.
I'll take it. I've always felt old, so I'll take it. Let's see. I just an aside. I thought it was there's something poetic about the fact that a lightning strike cleared the way for this current iteration of the CareHaus to be built.
You think I should amp that up?
Deus Ex Machina, maybe.
Superhero style.
Ooh, there we go. Nori asks, how can we distinguish community-oriented care practices from self-care practices? Are there ways to integrate the two?
That is a really great and beautiful question. I feel like when the pandemic started, I had a lot of students who felt guilty about kind of like, not survivor's guilt, but like, well, what can I do? And they're kind of feeling depressed because they just didn't know what to do. And I reminded them, there's people, a lot of them couldn't go home because there was grandparents or other family members who were vulnerable that they didn't want to get sick. And I just reminded them that self-care is really important because you're kind of nurturing your capacity. If you're drained all the time, then you don't have the capacity to be supportive of other people.
Yeah.
I think, in the case, like one model also to think about is like, with CareHaus, we think about social integration as opposed to social isolation, right? Integration is like ensuring that the older and disabled residents are integrated into society, which is a benefit to everybody.
Yeah.
And it's also benefiting them. So, I think it's help. Yeah.
It's a question that we've had to kind of grapple with when we put our exhibition together around the theme of care, because I think the way that we interface with care in 2021 is we talk about self-care, right? And I think it's not wrong. I think we live in a capitalist society that tries to pull as much production out of you as possible. So it is kind of radical to say, like, I'm not going to contribute right now. I'm going to focus on myself. right? So I think it's not wrong, but that's not the type of care we're focusing on in our season. Instead, I look to, I guess, you know, you think about if our society is based off of like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? And that triangle of like, we need physical stability, we need emotional stability. And what you get to is ultimately the transcendence of self, right? We need all these things to be a self person, the whole person. Then that's the reason that we think about self-care as kind of like the pinnacle to achieve. But the model that I've been introduced to and that we continue to kind of bring up in when we talk about our exhibition is when you look at the Blackfeet Nation, which Maslow took from the First Nations when you know, he was putting together his theory of self essentially. When you look at the Blackfeet Nation, you know, that triangle is organized so differently. At the base of the triangle is that self-actualization. So that's kind of the first thing you need to do. But then, you know, then you get to community care and community actualization, and then you get to kind of like the cycle of so it's no longer like myself being whole is what transcends me to higher planes, but it's like my community being whole is what we're trying to achieve. And I think that's the model of care and caregiving that we want to talk about as when we're unpacking care throughout the exhibition and through programming this season. But it's also like we can't discredit self-care. It's a part, even in the Blackfeet model. It's like you need self-care before you can contribute to your community, contribute to your elders, and then realize, you know, this model of society that we want to see.
Yeah. I love that. I'd love to see it. Is there,
Oh, I can send you, if you love diagrams, I'll send you an article and a diagram for sure. And M. Kin asks, storytelling plays such a prominent role in your body of work, and you're great at creating accessible narratives. Curious how this current superhero theme came about and what it does it signify to you?
I mean, for me, it is, you know, on the one hand, all of the people that I feel are superheroes because they're lifting up the voices of others with them. And I think, like, for example, I just did this project in that's opening tomorrow, I think, in outside of Montreal, called Musée de Joliette. And I was honoring a woman who's been involved. You saw her, a glimpse of her. She's involved along the audio, many stages of the project, including from CareHaus to the audio novellas. She is a labor trafficking survivor, and she came over to the United States when she was 19 to work as a nanny, and she got herself out of that situation and continued to work as a nanny while she got her PhD, and was working at the Brazilian Worker Center as executive director while then teaching sociology at BU. And, you know, she's had a lot of challenges, and it's like they're still very raw and vulnerable to her. And she really, it's that pain, I think, has never gone away, but she really has used it to inform her leadership in organizing Brazilian domestic workers and other domestic workers in Massachusetts and Connecticut nationwide to creating labor trafficking initiatives to squash that. And so, you know, I honored her and her teammates in this kind of installation. And I think one of the things that I really love about her and so many of the women that I've worked with, who for me are these superheroes, is that they're whole people that includes all their vulnerabilities, and they're fun people that you want to hang out with and invite to your dance party. And then I'm just so, I called Natalicia up to fact check something or do a kind of word check with her, and she was so honored, and she let me know that as of September 15th, she was invited by the Biden-Harris administration to be a senior advisor or on labor, which is,
Wow.
about that level of community self-determination or community self-actualization or support. She is that. So I think, I think the question of superheroes kind of is the appropriate question after the conversation about this porosity between individual and, community-wide strength.
I'm wondering if you personally face any kind of what are your experiences when approaching domestic workers, and like how do you identify yourself? Do you encounter any kind of class struggle, right, between like presenting yourself as an artist who are typically seen as like, maybe wealthier, maybe upper class, but interfacing with domestic workers who don't necessarily, who at least don't enjoy the same kind of stature in, I don't want to say we have a caste system, but like, there's a different class, there's a different class implications with each of these positions. Do you face any struggles?
I haven't really. I mean, I have worked as a caregiver. I have worked as a cleaner. I did those when I was an undergrad at Berkeley. So I was already in a pre-selectively, it was labor that I chose and was interested to do. I think my strongest voice that I speak from is as a domestic employer. In which when I was freelancing when my son was born, I was really struggling with the cost of care, and I was like working myself ragged and working around the clock, and at times not making that much more than the women our babysitter. So my parents don't have a safety net. They're immigrant, parents who are essentially living off their Social Security. So I feel like I again speak to a group of the sandwich generation, so I identify myself as a domestic employer for the most part, and I think I think for artists or cultural workers working with affected communities, a lot of I feel like it's like 70% of the work is just showing up and just continue to be part of what community groups are doing.
And I think I kind of have a love-hate term with the word artist, right? It's like it kind of pigeons you into like a type of like practice, but also like it means nothing, right? It's like, I'm an artist. So what do you do? It's like, well, kind of do this like social practice stuff. It's like, okay, so what's your medium? It's like, I don't have a medium. So it's like, you can navigate it in like interesting ways, and you can kind of get to where you want to go. And it gives you the freedom to kind of move you through those conversations. But I think one thing that I find really interesting about your work, you mentioned that like you're 10 plus years into this body of work. And I think that is just so rare, especially with social practice artists, right? It's like we're sometimes and this is starting to be more frowned upon, at least it's frowned upon in conversations, but like this idea of like you're dropping into a topic, into a community, you do a little bit of work, and then you figure out an exit. But you found a way, or at least you've committed yourself to sticking with this body of work and mutating that body of work over very different kind of different presentations. And I'm curious, what it's like to now be, over 10 years on the same topic, the same project.
I feel just continually inspired by the many different people. I mean, on the one hand, there's many different new contexts. The domestic workers across the United States is incredibly diverse. They all have their own separate issues. Those that I'm working with in Houston, it's completely different than those that I'm working with like in Baltimore or New York, whatever, or Boston. So it's just endlessly enriching and interesting to me. And I think with the movement for domestic workers' rights, it feels very much like a conversation where we're all really learning from each other. And informing each other. And I think one of the roles I have played before is going between different groups and sharing resources. Going back a step in the conversation about that cultural privilege, I feel like I'm also really frank with the groups that I'm working with about, when it's, well, on the one hand, for organizers, for them, it's useful for them to say, hey, there's this workshop by this artist. And it's doing the same work as like another kind of workshop that they might do, but it's funner for them to pick up the phone and be like, hey, do you want to do this workshop that involves singing and movement? Like, yeah, that sounds really fun. Or we're going to do this dance, or like, hey, we're going to do whatever. And it's for them, in the words of other organizers, it's funner than just always calling someone up to go to a rally, which gets exhausting, or going to like another normal meeting. About like when I want to tell you the story about when we were doing a project in at the Bettis Art Museum in Miami, and it was after Trump was elected, and for many of the women, the Latinx and Caribbean women that we were working with, simply walking down the street felt scary because they were getting yelled at.
Yeah.
And so, I went down there before we were supposed to do this thing at the museum. We're going to do a CareForce disco, and we're going to have the car there. And I said, well, like, what do you guys think? I was assuming it was going to be canceled. And they said, the visibility of us doing this in a group is actually really important for us to assert the right as mostly undocumented workers to be claiming public space. And the vehicle is this kind of pop-up spatial practice. It can also be, it's not so easily invisibilized, like a way a dance on the street can be like closed down and is tactically invisibilized, Yeah. But, and then further, they were like, but we actually really need those contacts at the museum. Like, we really want this opportunity because we're planning to pass a Bill of Rights for the city of Miami. And we see these people as our allies because they're culturally savvy. It's a purple state. So progressive is not the right word, but they are more apt to be sympathetic. So, and then if the cultural opportunity is not of interest to domestic workers, then we don't pursue it.
Right. I'm curious if, I like how you pointed out like how context of like the surroundings can change the work itself. I'm curious if the reception to the bodies of work of CareForce or CareHaus have changed within the last year, or if was there any moment in time where like there was a dramatic shift in how people were responding to the work?
I think so. Now there's 8 states that have passed their Bill of Rights. There's more. It feels like everything's just gaining momentum, which feels awesome. So things definitely feel easier. I think, especially with this presidential administration, Biden and Harris both have been supportive. Harris of a federal domestic worker Bill of Rights. Biden years ago was strongly supportive of caregivers and strengthening their systematic inclusion, strengthening their rights. That feels great and awesome, and that's like that leadership or that reception trickles down to people like Natalicia who are invited to be policy advisors. So yeah, I think we're just getting going, guys.
Wow, sometimes you can really code switch into true politician voice, and I'm surprised by it. I'm like, wow, she's like really building a movement.
I am.
You are. Okay, I think we're gonna just take 2 more questions, and then maybe I have a less serious one to ask. But first, Dan asks, is there anything you've heard or seen with abandoned or neglected U.S. retail mall spaces and repurposing those into co-housing community spaces?
Yeah, they're great because they're already graded for wheelchair users and so forth. Yeah, get us a mall, please.
They're already there's plenty of parking.
They're often near public transit.
Yes. They're hooked up with water and sewer, they're
exactly. Hook us up, Dan.
Yeah. Reject the next Amazon warehouse. They know we need a CareHaus in this mall. I'm curious, what was it like to drive a branded car across the country with a baby in it?
So, I have this strong impression that I then wrote about in this forthcoming book. And it was about how we were in Arizona and, we're pulling up to get gas, and, the people in the gas, so there's so many people in Arizona and border states whose family members do domestic labor, or they themselves do domestic labor. So like the gas attendants, they're like, woo, because it's so close to home for them.
Right.
I think we heard many times how people said, I've been working as a domestic worker for 15 years and I never really proudly identified as a nanny until I saw the nanny van. And I think just like seeing the name or seeing it being celebrated as this like kooky vehicle is fun. So I think, and also like I've had so many young people who've encountered the nanny van or the CareForce one, like, all of the women in my family do this kind of labor, but I never really thought it was like a thing. It's just like it's this, what Miranda Frickers refers to as this hermeneutic lacuna, like this absence of perceiving and therefore naming, which then contributes to this like conspicuous absence of what is really right underneath all of our noses.
Yeah.
So I think those conversations are really fun.
Cool. Okay. I was just wondering if you got called out one too many times.
It generally is positive. I don't think we never got yelled at, which we thought we might get yelled at.
Okay, I'm gonna wrap us up. So what do we have to look forward to? We have you said when is the book coming out?
Spring, next spring.
Next spring. Okay. And where can we find the book? Do you know yet?
Columbia University Press is the publisher.
Yeah.
So you can look at their website or my website, and we'll let you know.
Okay. And then CareHaus opens when?
2023.
2023. Okay. Early 2023 or late 2023?
Late 2023 is when it'll be staffed and fully open.
Okay.
So y'all out there with malls and other potential sites, reach out.
Dan has said he would love to work with you on that. So you two connect after this event. Let's see. As for Asian Arts Initiative, please come check out our exhibition on CARE. We have Marisa's 2 videos in the, I will share your email and Twitter with the YouTube group. Let's see. Yeah, we have 2 videos by Marisa Jahn in the exhibition. We have a community fridge, we have a free and lending library, and we have AV rentals provided by television. The exhibition is on view. The gallery is open Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Saturdays from 2 to 6, and the exhibition is on view until the end of this year, until December 18th, 2021. Marisa, thank you so much for sharing your time, your work with us. And please let's keep in touch, and I'm eager to see how all these projects come to fruition. Like you said, you're just getting started.
Bye, everybody.